The next book will be a kind of book that I just kind of found in a thrift store. I don't know anything about it other than it existed. And I'll be honest with you, just from the cover alone, I was really excited about it. So, I don't know why I'm sorry, I'm too used to doing these TBRs as if I'm doing it for the first time. But Snowglobe was a fairly interesting thing. I'm a little worried based on what it says on the back. The Hunger Games meets Squid Game and Soyoung Park's dystopian thriller, Snowglobe. Typically when I find that works like this are compared to two very popular works, it's not very good. It just tries to copy elements from those works without really understanding what made them work. Now I'm going to be a little more lenient with this one. This is actually a foreign novel because Soyoung Park wrote it, but right here it says it's translated by Jungmin Lee Comfort. And I don't know if that's a company or that's a person. So this is actually a foreign novel, and I'm sure I've gotten into this background. So I'm not going to go too much into it, but in any case, let me go ahead and read the back. Enclosed under a vast dome, Snowglobe is the last place on Earth that's warm. Outside Snowglobe is a frozen wasteland, and every day citizens face the icy world to get their jobs at the power plant, where they produce the energy Snowglobe needs to keep running. Their only solace comes in the form of a 24-hour television programming streamed directly from the domed city. The residents of Snowglobe have everything: fame, fortune, and above all, safety from the desolation outside their walls. In exchange, their lives broadcast to the less fortunate, who watch eagerly, hoping for the chance to one day become actors themselves. Shobam, I think that's how you pronounce it. I'll be honest, I probably am butchering names already, so I'm hoping I got these right. Shobam lives for the time she spends watching the shows produced inside Snowglobe. Her favorite? Go Around, starring Go Hurry, Snowglobe's biggest star. And it turns out the key to getting Shobam her dream life. Because Hurry is dead, and Shobam has been chosen to take her place. Only, life inside the Snowglobe is nothing like what you see on TV. Reality is a lie, and truth seems to be forever out of reach. Oh, so it is a person. I just looked on the back. So anyways, Snowglobe actually, if you wanted to compare it to something, it almost sounds like a mix of Truman Show with I want to say Squid Games. Truman Show mixed with not Snowpiercer, not really. I kind of want to say this other book I read, Frozen, but I have higher hopes for this book than what I got from Frozen. So I don't want to seem like I'm talking down to it. So my first impressions of it are that it's going to be an interesting thing, and I'm actually looking forward to reading it because it does count as a foreign novel because it was translated. This was written in Korean. So I'm always very interested in reading translated works, and considering the translator was a Korean English translator, I'm hoping that their translation is a little more seamless than a couple of the ones I've read in the past. I've read both the Harry Hole novels, at least the first one, and the Metro 2033 novels, and both of their translations were fine, but you could very much tell with the clunkiness. Some of them felt very literal in certain places, and I know translation is a mix of being both literal and taking in the subject material, because it's like One Piece is one of my favorite pieces of fiction ever, and that's clearly one of those things where it's like there's a lot of nuance to the joke that is lost when you translate it to English. At least so I've been told. Welcome back, everyone, to Afrodo Reviews. On this channel, I help you decide: is that book worth reading over second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? That's what we're here to decide. Well, that was dramatic. Snowglobe is a young adult South Korean book published on October 23rd, 2020 by author Soyoung Park and translated into English by Jungmin Lee Comfort. Now, I'm going to lead right now, just with that right now. I'm going to be butchering names. Just fair warning, right off the bat. Just buckle up. I apologize, but The translation of this book only came out in 2024, after the Penguin Random Publishing House released it. So if my mostly English-speaking audience hasn't heard of the book until recently, or is thinking, wait, I thought that book came out in 2024, that's the reason there's a discrepancy. A sequel to the book was published in 2021, while the translation came out only this year of 2025, on May 6th. In addition, this book has been picked up by CJ Entertainment, and they're planning to produce it as a K-drama, which they've already announced. K-drama, for those of you who don't know, means Korean drama. I know I have some people on here who wouldn't quite understand that. Apart from that, though, there's really not too much to talk about in backgrounds of this book. At least not so much that I could find. I'm sure if I was in like South Korea or something, I probably could have found more. But as it stands right now, all my attempts to look it up online kind of just kept bringing me other people's review of the book. Without any other thing to say, and let's move on to the cover. Now, the cover is a minimalistic one, despite how bright it is. In terms of symbolism, it's actually pretty apt, featuring what looks like a pair of frozen flowers, where the ice around it is cracking and breaking, and this is no doubt relating to the story being told. You know, the beauty of something being held behind glass, but in reality, once you crack it, you find out there's actually not that much beauty behind it. You know, that kind of thing. I can't fault it for what it's trying to do, and I do think it's good enough largely because, well, its cover drew me to the story, and I picked it up largely because the cover was pretty decent. This is actually one of the rare books I've purchased brand new from the store versus the vast majority of my collection, which I find in thrift stores. All in all, I really don't have much else to say on it other than, yeah, it's okay cover. I've seen better, but it's still good. Now, there is one element to the cover I do want to call attention to, and that's the quote on the back here. Now, this quote on the back from Entertainment Weekly notes the book as The Hunger Games meets Squid Game in Soyoung Park's dystopian thriller Snowglobe. Or you can go down here from the Amelie Win Zhao, the New York Times bestselling author of Song of Silver, Flame Like Night. That's actually one of the books on my TBR soon, but we'll talk about that later. And she describes the book as utterly unputdownable. Snowglobe is an out-of-this-world dystopian thrill ride. Soyoung Park has created an addictive, twisty tale perfect for fans looking for the next Squid Game or Parasite. Now, putting aside the fact that I really hate the description of unputdownable, just because it's a very, very, very niche thing to me. Well, actually, I don't think it's niche to me, and I know a couple other people who absolutely hate that word, but I hate it. But putting it down, you'll notice the common theme there is Squid Game, Hunger Games, Parasite. You know, all those have very common themes. Now, I want you to keep that in mind, and I'll talk about it a little more for deeper in my review, because it requires me to spoil a bit more of the story than I want to do here in order to talk about it. So, again, just put a pin in that, keep it in mind. And let's go on to the synopsis. Well, ordinarily, I would include in this part of this review, or this part of the, ordinarily I would include in this part of the review the, just some extra additions onto the synopsis from what I read on the back, to talk about what I think is important to know about the story going in, without revealing too much in terms of spoilers. But, all things considered, this book's pretty fine for that. The synopsis on the dust cover is actually pretty apt for what the story is about for the most part. For the first part, I should say, but again, I'll get a little more into that. And honestly, I don't really have much else to add in terms of synopsis, at least not at this moment. So let's go ahead and just go on to the tried and true question. What did I think of this book? Now, if I were to give you a completely spoiler-free review of the book, namely really only speaking in depth about maybe the first quarter of the book, you'd probably hear me say that this book is good, or at least you'd hear me talk about the book in a way that it gives the impression that it's good. And on a basic level, the premise is appealing. The idea of combining something as subtly dystopic as The Truman Show.
As Truman grew up, we were forced to manufacture ways to keep him on the island.
With something much more overtly dystopic with The Hunger Games or Squid Game, it does kind of have an interesting idea. Well, it makes me genuinely curious of what this book's going to do, what it's going to give me, how it's going to explore this world. And for the first part of the book, I was pretty invested in the story. The idea of someone who just so happens to look like a famous star being asked to fill in for that star after she game ended herself is an interesting concept. The premise works pretty well. You can obviously guess how the author's going to work some of the narrative themes in it. And in addition to that, you really don't have... It's a really simple setup to get the characters involved. Because obviously the main character, Shobam, I don't know if I'm going to say that right. I really do apologize if that one's wrong. Isn't going to look something as great as this in the mouth, and not going to look this gift horse in the mouth, especially in regards to how comfortably it'll set up her and her family. But it also sets the immediate question of why this famous actress, Go Hyrie, would do such a thing. And watching Shobam deal with the initial interactions of Snowglobe is pretty interesting. Watching as someone completely out of her element has to adapt to a life she only knows about very superficially, and thought she knew more. There were a couple times I had to remind myself that the book was translated due to how clunky and weird certain parts are, but that's not actually a criticism, that's a very big compliment. With other translated works that I've read in the past, like Metro 2033, or the Harry Hula series, The Bat, it was very abundantly clear throughout most of the book that the story is translated from a different language into English. And that's because it has this very awkward, stilted prose that makes you aware that whoever's writing this is not a native English speaker. Whereas this feels much more like a young author just trying to find her footing in terms of word choice and prose. It doesn't feel like someone who doesn't speak the language. It feels like someone who just doesn't have a lot of experience writing. So big credit to the translator, Jogming Lee Comfort, and how he translated this book. I think it was a he. How she translated this book. My bad. I apologize. However, I can't summon up too much goodwill for this part of the video because admittedly, the longer I read this book, the more I just felt it wasn't very good. It vastly underutilizes almost every single one of its characters. Its narrative themes are poorly constructed and utilized. I guess I'm repeating my word there, but and the last 120 pages or so, it honestly felt like the author just stopped caring and wanted to wrap her story up as swiftly as possible. Now, unfortunately, so much of what I felt was wrong with this book does require me to go pretty deeply into the spoiler section. I could offer very vague, spoiler-free critiques here, but I feel that would just lead me to only sort of talking about the issues I had before rewinding backwards and just talking about those issues again, but with much more depth. It's actually genuinely wild how much my opinion and what my main problem with this book was and how it changed the deeper into the book I got. For example, when I was about 100 pages in, my biggest issue was with how Shobam seemed to be making the worst mistakes possible, and then would forget all about the hazards of making these mistakes the next time a choice came up. Like, she witnesses the director Cha, who is the main villain of our story, do something absolutely heinous within the first few minutes of knowing her. But then, like, the next chapter, she's treating director Cha as someone who's clearly a kindred soul of hers. Who's someone to be trusted, someone to rely upon, even though director Cha is only showing her the worst part of herself. Or, okay, that's not fair. Let me rephrase that. But when director Cha is only showing how expendable she finds people who don't serve her direct purposes. Now, then take that 300 pages in, and it's because the story jumped the shark in just about every way possible, failing to utilize almost all of its characters, and just completely bungling the theme that it promised to set up. So, I'm going to have to tag a spoiler warning here right now, and recommend that if you do want to go into this book blind, which I kind of have a hard time recommending personally, feel free to take off now, or go ahead and skip to the conclusion using the chapter system down below. But, So the first thing I want to talk about is the characters, and namely how none of them mean anything to the story. So the book starts out first by following Shobam in her native environment, which is a poor community with her family. She has a twin brother, Ongi, who she bickers with but ultimately loves. She has a grandmother who's very loving but has dementia to the point that she's convinced that the still living at this point Go Hairi is Shobam, and Shobam is Hairi and Ongi's girlfriend. So you have to deal with that kind of mental turmoil of, the grandmother slowly fading out and they have to take care of her. And then you have the mother, who, while she's largely out of their lives due to their work schedules being completely opposing, is shown to be a woman who tries her best to make the best of the terrible circumstances they're in. Like, they spend what little time they have together. Their mother makes a point to go out and get him treats every so often when they have the spare expenses to do so. And she always does something extravagant for them on their birthday, so they feel loved. We'll set up very quickly that this is a family unit that, while struggling financially, they are in fact very loving. Now, when we meet Hairi's family unit, they're shown to be a very mere opposite. Hairi's grandmother seems to be sweet and innocent on the surface, but the second she's not putting on a front, she's a spiteful hag who physically strikes Shobam for acting the wrong way.
Oh, an anti-bullying video? How adorable.
The mother is more present, but at the same time, it's shown to be very clear that she's deeply traumatized by the loss of Hairi's father, implying that she was emotionally cold to Hairi the second the cameras are off. And now that Hairi's own game over happened, she's further traumatized and taking that out even more on Shobam. And in place of Shobam's twin brother, Ongi, we instead have a pair of playful, bickering party ants who feel right out of a sitcom. They seem like Ongi at first, but much like the previous two, only in a very superficial way. We don't get nearly as much with them, but the second the cameras are off, it is noticeable that Shobam says they stop being friendly and just quickly take off to go be by themselves, implying much of the party persona that the world knows them as is an act. So you would think that even if the author doesn't sufficiently explore these characters, in depth, adds a lot of nuance to them, she's at least setting them up for a nice thematic narrative that Hairi's family had all the wealth in the world, and yet it seems like they barely functioned as a family unit, focusing more on their public face and their desire for wealth and fame. Meanwhile, Shobam's family, who never had any of that wealth to begin with, are closer and love each other unabashedly. They do their best that even when times are hard to make sure their dementia-riddled grandmother is never left alone, so she always feels loved and never feels abandoned, even if she doesn't recognize them. I felt like it was going to show great emotional turmoil for Shobam. With the longer she was in Snowglobe, the more she was pretending to be Hairi, the more she was going to miss her own family because, well, the family she's in now is so broken, it's not really one anymore, despite what everyone else in the world thinks. Everyone there just is putting on a mask. And the second they don't have to, they're not a family anymore. Except, no. Neither family is actually worth noting after a bit. Shobam's family is always sort of present in the background, but after a certain point, they're only there as a motivation for Shobam and in a very, very minor sense. There's even a scene later on in the book where her twin brother pursues his dream job of being conductor, and Shobam has to pretend to be someone else around him, and yet somehow this feels out of place and out of nowhere. This scene feels like it's just a distraction. It feels like it exists just to remind us, oh yeah, by the way, you remember Ongi? He still exists. But is largely irrelevant to the plot at hand. Because by this point, the story is on a completely different path than what has been set up before. The Go Hairi family is basically forgotten the second Shobam leaves Snowglobe. We get no conclusion on any of their characters, no come-ups that we can see, no further exploration of their characters beyond the very surface level one I gave you. What I just described to you about how their family unit works, that's it. That I described the entirety of their characters. Every character has the depth of a puddle in this story. But the puddle is stretched so thin, you think, oh, well, it's got to be deeper than that, right? For example, let's also take a look at Bonway. Now, Bonway was an interesting idea to me, and it was one of the first time I was genuinely curious with a character who I thought was going to be the main love interest of the book. Actually, this is one thing I will give the book credit for. This might actually be the first time I've read a young adult book, a dystopic young adult book, where there's no love interest attached. So, yeah, I will give it breaking new grounds on that front. Anyways, at first the story presents him as a very cold, aloof guy who treats our main character like she's barely worth his time, except for one random small act of kindness that he does. You know, the typical YA, brooding, awesome romance option. However, then the book surprises me, because the one time Shobam is able to be around him when the cameras turn off, she suddenly finds out that Bonway is a much more affable and friendly guy than he seems, and that he clearly had some secret relationship with Hyrie. Now this made me excited, because this presented a very interesting dynamic to play with, and I'm like, ooh, I wonder how the author's going to handle this. Not only does Bonway think Shobam is Hyrie, he's one of the many people who don't know the secret that Hyrie, and now it seems like that Shobam will have to not only navigate someone who knew the real Hyrie versus the Hyrie who was on camera, but she's also dealing with someone who clearly keeps his own real self hidden from the cameras. Meaning that while the real Hyrie would also know him, she doesn't. And she has to pretend to know him. She has to try to figure out all these inner secrets that they have. Has to figure out how to read him even when he's pretending to be cold and aloof, because that's what the real Hyrie could do. Perhaps maybe they'd even form something of a bond with him, while you got that dangling dread hanging over her, knowing that eventually something's gonna reveal the truth, something that will completely demolish their relationship potentially, meaning him knowing the truth could have disastrous consequences. Especially because he's the son of the Snowglobe's president, meaning he holds a lot of political power. Except again, no. Again, once Shobam is removed from the Snowglobe environment, that's it. Bonway does not exist as a character anymore. He appears very briefly at the end, where Shobam appeals to him with a promise he made to the original Hyrie, only the entire scene rings hollow, because nowhere near the right amount of personal connection was set up to make this work. Bonway feels like a prop that was used to hint that Hyrie's life was more complicated behind the scenes than it appeared, but then the author did nothing to develop either that idea or the character of Bonway. No joke, you could write out Bonway and the story would stay the same.
What are we even doing here anymore?
I brought towels. Anyone want a towel? I'll take one.
But I shouldn't be too surprised, because that's true of literally everything about this book and what it sets up. No joke, part of the way through this book, Shobam randomly discovers that there's a network of magical mirrors that can teleport someone who steps into them into different locations of Snowglobe. This is meant to be used exclusively by the presidential family, and Bonway catchers are using them, only for this to never come up again. No, I genuinely mean it. Never again do these mirrors come up. What was the point of them? I have legitimately never seen a bigger lipped alligator moment in my life. Oh, and the whole thing with Shobam and Hyrie looking alike? Well, through the first part of the book, you're not given any reason to suspect that their natural appearances being so close together is anything weird. It's just a cosmic coincidence, and honestly, that's perfectly fine. There's nothing to the story that required it to be deeper. But then, out of nowhere, it reveals that there's actually a third person out there who looks just like Hyrie, called Saren, and she shows up and manages to replace Shobam in her own bid at fame. Now this is weird, because the initial idea felt like the story was hinting that Hyrie wasn't actually dead, which honestly would have made much more sense. And the lie that Saren tells Shobam in the story about having been severely disfigured in an accident as Hyrie, and it would have been an interesting narrative element to show how quickly Snowglobe tried to replace Hyrie the moment her natural beauty was gone, to the point that Hyrie has to undergo extensive cosmetic surgeries and force her way back in. it could be a very nice critique on celebrities and Hollywood, or I'm not actually sure what they call the Korean Hollywood. I don't know if it's just say Korean Hollywood, because I know like the Indian Hollywood is called Bollywood. Anyways, point is, there was a genuine way to use this element to critique. But no, it's a completely new character called Saren, who actually just happens to look like them. Well, don't get me wrong, this wasn't satisfying at the time, but I could have forgiven it. There is a throwaway line in the beginning of the book where Chobam says that she recalls a bit of advice that her grandmother gave her during the more lucid moments of their life. How every person has two people who look just like them in the world. And that's a nice payoff to what is otherwise a throwaway line. And you could do something with this. You know, you still got Saren completely replacing Chobam, meaning that Chobam goes from having the height of experience to being replaced and a nothing again. So she could taste the wealth and then realize how much better everyone lives before just kind of being discarded again the moment it's no longer convenient for the producer to have her around. You can still play with this idea. Except no, that's not what happened. Because guess what? Chobam is actually part of a secret cloning project that was created by director Cha, the maker of Go Around, in an attempt to create the perfect star for a television series, and then make plenty of duplicates so they can be replaced at any time. In fact, Go Hyrie was not even actually Hyrie, but just the first clone brought in, and the story is going to follow the story of a group of clones banding together to take down the uncaring hand of the system that brought him into existence.
Don't tell me you're fighting against us. No, not against you. Against the Empire.
Suddenly, in the last 100 pages, actually less than that, honestly, Park completely pivoted from the story she was telling, and is now Chobam is going to travel around the frozen wasteland of the world, gathering clones before making one final attempt to expose the evils of Director Cha to the world. And that's what this story feels like. It feels like a series of half-baked ideas that Park wanted to explore, but then got bored of halfway through and just abandoned them. I can point that out for almost every part of the story. Each new section legitimately feels like it could have been an entirely different book. And honestly, should have been. So little time to actually explore the elements that Park sets up in the stories. So they all just fall flat and die. Heck, I think it even hinders the greater narrative of the book, the few elements that do survive through each section. Again, keep in mind with what I said. You remember how this book is constantly being compared to Squid Game, Hunger Games, Parasite, all stories that talk about how the working class is exploited by upper class for their own enjoyment. With Squid Games and Hunger Games even taking that one step further, taking advantage of the desperation of the lower class to torment them further in genuine death games. Well, unfortunately, this doesn't work. Because we see so little of Chobam's more poor lifestyle that we really have no way to gauge how much more comfortable her life is when she gets to Snowglobe. There's a reason we spend so much time with Katniss going about her daily life in District 12 before they do the drawing. We get to see how much her world sucks, and how people like the Capitol further exploit them by allowing poor families to have their kids enter their name a dozen more times into the drawings to get a measly amount of basic supplies that they need to survive. Because what does it matter if your kid goes to a death game if they're going to starve to death if they don't anyways? Instead, Chobam is shuffled from her life to Snowglobe, then out of Snowglobe without any real exploration of how they compare, or what she's like pre-Snowglobe to post-Snowglobe, or in Snowglobe. She doesn't even seem to care about the 10 hours of back-breaking work she's expected to do every day when she's poor. She doesn't complain about how she can barely walk at the end of each shift. We don't see her constantly dealing with blisters popping up, how her family struggles day to day to even eat. We don't see her yearning to be able to spend more time with her mother. We don't see her talking about how they can barely afford basic heating elements. We don't see her talking about any of that kind of stuff. We don't see any of it. And then when she gets to Snowglobe, she's just like, oh wow, it's so great here. It's so awesome. It's so great. It's so awesome. It's so great. And then she's gone. So you're thinking, okay, well, maybe the story still works as a critique of celebrity culture. Taking a look at what is the reality of people everyone thinks they know and the truth of those people. After all, we do see a bit of that. We see the sweet grandmother of Hyrie is actually an abusive monster. We see the mother is barely mentally stable and no one seems to care about helping her beyond just getting her ready for the next camera shoot. And how someone like Bonway doesn't even feel comfortable expressing his true emotions for Hyrie while they're on camera, because he knows that it'll just become one giant spectacle, and he can't truly love someone without it being part of the spectacle of the world. Now, honestly, if this was making fun of celebrity culture and how many people think they know and understand celebrities just because they follow their social media or seen all their TV shows or whatever, that could be interesting. You could work with that. And it could even work as a critique against people who expect celebrities to have no personal lives in the slightest. How even the mildest of dramas has to be broadcast to the world, affording what are still people no matter of privacy. Oh no, Leonardo DiCaprio wore a different color shirt today. Except, no, that's not explored either. In fact, Joe Baum even goes on to complain that the original Hyrie is such a stupid girl for not understanding the positives of her celebrity life far outweighing the negatives, and how she was really dumb to zero herself. And you know what? If I was Hyrie, I never would have done that. And me. Oh, it all got taken away from me. Burn the system. I'm not joking, by the way. That's literally how she does it. Shobam has absolutely no interest in taking down the system until she's no longer benefiting from it. The second she's no longer benefiting from the system, that's when she wants to take it down. Which is, a great image for your main character. She's such a good person. At best, the story works as a critique of Korea's idol culture. Now, since I'm not Korean, or I've never really been in Korea, or that invested into K-dramas, I watch the occasional one here and there, I obviously can't speak with authority on this, and this largely comes from what I've been told from other people. But I've been told certain things, like the most unrealistic thing about K-pop demon hunters, yes, including the demonic part, is that they have a manager who actually seems to care about their lives. Basically, it's well known that powerful managers, or in this case you could say directors, recruit talent into artificially formed groups, making them work grueling hours, maintaining very specific images, all while knowing they're expendable the second the popularity fades. And for the most part, the story does do that. We see that even in the beginning, what with director Cha coldly executing a former actor named Cooper, who knew too much about the swap between Hyrie and Shobam, as an implied to have killed another former actor named Miryu when she refused to do some unspecified task. By the way, another example. Despite it being set up that director Cha went to go visit an actor famous for being a murderer, at no point do we ever learn what director Cha was trying to get out of Miryu. We just learn that they visited, whatever she asked Miryu refused, so she ran her down with the limo. However, even then, you could argue that's not really explored well at all. Director Cha is extremely manipulative, and the woman clearly cares about herself and her legacy more than anything. But at the same time, she's not as cruel or nasty as she could have been to Chobam. She shows repeated care to Chobam beyond what she has to in order to make Chobam work with her. And the story even seems to go out of its way at times in order to make you understand, oh no, she's not actually as bad as you think. Like, at one point we find out that director Cha seemingly murdered Hyrie's pre-Snowglobe family in order to trap the girl in her position. Only it turns out director Cha says, she just assumed that. What I did was I moved them to a new place where they would be more comfortable. Now, I didn't tell Hyrie that because I wanted her to focus, but I didn't murder her family. And at no point does the story imply she's lying. But with the way the world is, why couldn't she have just killed Hyrie's family? That would have made her despicable. And it would have made it very clear that she didn't care about Hyrie beyond anything more than being in place. After all, what did Hyrie's family have to gain. Hyrie was never going to go back, because if Hyrie went back, then everything was revealed. And at multiple instances, she shows genuine care for Shobam, to the point that her original plan was to use Shobam as just a brief decoy until she could get Saren in to fully replace Hyrie, but then realized that she kind of liked Shobam and decided that, you know what, I think I'll give you the full spot, because, me and you, we kind of vibe, and I enjoy this, Let's go ahead and, do this properly. Like I said, the story just doesn't work on a number of levels, and this is clearly not helped by the fact that, again, at about halfway the point, honestly, a little bit before that, the author just feels like she got tired of writing this specific story and just wanted to finish it. We shoot through elements of the story that, again, could fill entire books by themselves in about 90 pages. I wasn't kidding when I said the last 100 pages of this book are dedicated to bringing together various clones of the character in order to expose Director Cha's blatant disregard in what she's doing. And I do mean that. I mean that even the revelation that they are all clones are done in these 100 pages. Which means we get the revelation, the introduction... Actually, hold on. We get the start of the plan, we get the revelation, we get the introduction of 2 more clones, the plan fully executed now that they know everything, the execution of the plan, and the consequences of the plan in 100 pages. And we don't even really see the aftermath. We see the characters doing their plan, and then we just hard cut to Director Cha already in jail, as our character angrily beats on the glass window separating them like an angry animal as she chides Director Cha for everything she's done. Like she wasn't just perfectly content with Director Cha's plan when she was benefiting from it. And yeah, there's that token, well, I benefited from Hyrie's death either, so I guess I'm just as bad. Except that's not the problem with her. The problem was she didn't care about it while she was benefiting. She cared about it only after she lost the benefits. And then it felt like, well, if I can't have it, no one can.
If I can't have you,
no one can.
And then it has the gall to end with epilogue chapters that hint at coming books or stories. Like, you could have dedicated these additional 20 pages to telling the story you're currently telling in a better way. More succinctly, more carefully. Focus on your first story before you start dropping hints at a second story. Or a third story. Or a prequel story. I genuinely don't know how this book is going to work as a K-drama because it's so nonsensical at points that I have to question it. And I say that with full knowledge of how weird K-dramas can get. There's just so many elements of this book that either don't work or just plain pointless. The show is going to have to spend a lot of extra time fleshing out characters. But then, to what end? The characters aren't used effectively, and none have a role in the final arc or even motivations of Chobam. What is the point of anything I've read in these books? Every character is pointless. Every element is pointless. I can literally sum up this entire book and what it tells me in 3 sentences. A poor girl gets a chance to replace a rich girl. Rich girl's life turns out to be a little more complicated than she thought, but before she has a chance to make a choice, poor girl gets replaced by another poor girl. Because of that, poor girl decides to try and destroy the whole thing. It's notable that it's not even the system that's portrayed as fundamentally corrupt and in need of changing. The enemy is definitively Director Cha in this book in the character's mind, and she's the one that needs to be brought down. There's a reason stories like Hunger Games often make the main overarching enemy the guy in charge. The celestial dragons from One Piece aren't just one bad apple in a system. They're a product of the inherently corrupt and tyrannical system, which allows them to indulge their genuinely heinous actions. Taking down one celestial dragon won't change anything, and everyone knows that. No, not even that. What you need to do is destroy the very system holding them up.
Was the defender of the fishmen, Saint Don Quixote Miosgard.
That's right.
It's just, I could be here for literal days explaining why this book, I felt, failed on so many fundamental levels, dissecting it 1,000 different ways to show why it went wrong. But I'm genuinely baffled of how to go further into it. For that matter, I don't know. I guess I'd give this book a 4 out of 10. And the only reason I'm giving it a 4 out of 10 instead of something lower is the most of the other things I've given 3 out of 10s have like pissed me off on a very subjective level, but the only reason this book annoys me so much is it felt like it had so much promise, and then it was just like, I'll just tell a different story, you know? The author felt like she had really good ideas, and I feel like if this is the case, if she just stayed focused on one idea, like take these sections, and instead of just these sections being a part of one book, make that entire section a book. Show me Shobam struggling to adapt to Snowglobe life. Show me the struggles that she has after she's forced out of it. Show me the identity crisis she has when she finds out she's a clone designed only to take place as an actor in Snowglobe and is utterly considered dispensable otherwise. Show me these things. It's like when I think about my other 3 out of 10s, it's because I actually hate the characters, whereas this, I'm just, it could have been better. It could have been so much better, and it wasn't. I genuinely can't recommend this book because I feel it fails on so many accounts, and I really wanted to like this. I was excited about this book. I purposely did Sci-Fi September this month with the intent of reviewing this book above all of them. The Star Trek book, the Doctor Who book, they were fun, but they weren't why I did this month. This book was. And maybe that's why I'm so frustrated with it. My expectations were a little higher, and that's why it made it feel so much worse. But I guess as far as that goes, that's really all I have to say now, so I'll see you guys later. I don't have much else to talk about this book. I really don't recommend it. And yeah. That's all I got. So that everyone.